I want to make a little introduction for these videos that Kate and I have recorded together. We recorded them over like a span of about 2 months, and in these videos we explore the text by Freud on Little Hans. We read the Little Hans text following reading this book by Jacques Lacan called The Object Relations. It's his fourth seminar. Almost the entire second half of Lacan's fourth seminar is dedicated to the Little Hans case, and Lacan ties the question of Hans to his exploration there on perversion. We met in 5 sessions, and we weren't sure what we wanted to do with the recordings, whether we wanted to write something down later on, or just have them for our own memory. We go through the text slowly and try to see if we can understand what Hans is going through, what the process is he's making, and we also try to look out for the different readings that we came in contact with. What we were trying to focus on in our reading was the different significant notions or meanings that pop up in Hans's speech and what to make of them, because we found it a difficult text to entangle. It's a speech by a very young child, and at a first reading just seems like babble by a 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old, depending on his age at the time. So we really wanted to try to really dig into the themes that Hans is working with, that structure, how he relates to himself and the world surrounding him. And that's basically what we did in this reading and what you can see in it. So we have this family that is living in Vienna, and sort of are in contact with Freud, and at some point in their child, that child develops a phobia, and at that point, sort of they consult Freud as to what to do about their child's phobia, and sort of this is the case, but sort of, as I said, like there is also previously this just messaging, I guess, as friends or colleagues or something, messages from the dad to Freud. Right. And sort of in these previous messages, before sort of the phobia starts, before the parents turn to Freud for help, I think we can also already find a couple of interesting things. So first of all, I think Lacan does sort of put some weight on the fact that sort of the parents try to raise Hans sort of with as little coercion as possible, with as little sort of in a sense that they're very liberal parents, and they sort of want their child to express himself freely and sort of try to put as little constraint onto him as possible.
Which is quite a lot, because this is in like 1905.
Yeah, I think this kind of falls out of its time.
Because the father is very sweet and he's really involved with Hans. He spends a lot of time with Hans. He speaks to him a lot. I don't know what the typical relationship was back then, but maybe not so much. So yeah, it is a slightly different upbringing for Hans than compared to the other kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So this child develops, or not develops, shows like a interest in whittlers and in people's whittlers, in his own whittler. And basically, like the whittler becomes basically a tool sort of to differentiate things that he didn't really differentiate before. And this is also what I find really interesting in how Freud sort of writes about this, where he says like, yeah, so Hans has this interest in whittlers, and he asks, oh, the cow, like the cow sort of whittles from her, what's the English word? Uter?
Udders, yeah. Yeah. The
Can
milk
you,
from that udder.
udder. Okay, yeah. I haven't heard that before. And he shows this great interest in whittlers, and then at some point when he's 3.5 years old, his mom says, if you don't stop like playing with the whittler, I'm gonna send the doctor and he will cut it off. And then, as you already said, like Hans remarks, yeah, okay. Well, if that's happening, then I'll just like pee out of my bottom. I just whittle out of my bottom. This is, I think, very interesting because here at the beginning, sort of a lot of things which I think makes a lot of sense. Like this, we're talking about a 3.5-year-old child here. A lot of things are sort of undifferentiated. And I think you can really see in the progression of the case that sort of more things become differentiated. Like at the sort of the very, very earliest sort of, or like the question of the whittler sort of comes to do dogs and horses have whittlers? And do then sort of, I think at some point he asked like, do chairs or locomotives sort of have whittlers? And he comes to the conclusion, no, they don't have whittlers. And sort of he differentiates sort of between something that is alive and something that is dead, or Freud says animate and inanimate. And
It becomes like this rule which he like navigates the world. Everyone has one, not everyone doesn't.
yeah. Hans is also sort of asking his parents about their whittlers.
Yeah.
Like he's asking his dad, do you have a whittler? And the dad says, yes, of course. And then he also asks his mother, and she also says yes, which is sort of interesting. But I think it's, as we talked about, it is a bit strange for her to say that she also has a whittler, just like grammatically, but sort of it in a certain sense it makes sense because whittler sort of doesn't directly sort of, I guess sort of you would usually say it means penis, but sort of it, I think just sort of the word itself just means basically that which you pee with, that you whittle with.
I do think the language is really ambiguous. I think it's exactly what you just said, because originally what was it, Willy Macker?
Say that again.
Like, what is the original word? Because obviously it's been translated in English to whittler, but the word, was it Willy Macker?
Yeah, Vivi-Macher. Yeah,
which right. And like honestly, it does translate as well. You could even say like wee maker. Like
right, exactly. You could say it really just translates to wee maker, and sort of, and then it makes sense that sort of the mother says, yes, I do have a wee maker.
At the same time, I don't know why, but you're right that it does still like suggest a penis.
Yeah, it kind of does.
It shouldn't, and so like technically the mother is right in her response. Of course, she wees. But although this is really ironic because many people say that males don't actually know where they wee from. But anyway, so technically she was like answering yes, but I don't know. I don't know how much has she been discussing with Hans this? Because I know the father has, and I think it's really clear when Hans is pointing to all of these things when they're whittling, like even incorrectly, the cow's udder when the milk's coming out, but he's like always pointing at penises or things that look like penises. So I think the dad would understand what Hans is getting.
Yeah, yeah. You would kind of think that sort of that's implied, but okay. So the mother also tells him that sort of she has a whittler, and he says, "I thought you were so big you'd have a whittler like a horse." And I think this is also sort of another point of sort of inquiry of knowledge, that sort of big animals, big people, big, animate things also have bigger whittlers. So there's this theme of growth is I guess sort of implied here and later on stated sort of more directly by Hans when there's the birth of the sister, and like she doesn't have any teeth at the beginning, and he says, well, okay, your teeth will grow eventually, like her teeth will get bigger in time.
I thought it was interesting with Hannah that he was so disappointed in her because she couldn't speak. And he's like, why is everyone making such a fuss about this being that can't even speak? And he blames her not being able to speak on the fact that she doesn't have teeth. Again, like, good for us to see how kids make these random connections because Hans makes a lot of them. But it's just interesting. We've obviously spoke about the importance of language in Lacan and how, it forms almost our subjectivity. And it's interesting that Hans is like, she can't even speak. Why are we even about this thing?
I'm like still guilty sort of this. Like when there's a baby, so when my friends have like a baby and like there's a new baby, I don't know. I find it. I mean, I don't find it super uninteresting, but sort of, I see the baby. I think it's like very cool because my friends have a new baby. I think babies are cute, but sort of, I just sort of realized this in sort of when like my friends, they have a son who is like, I think 4 or almost 5 right now, and like with him now I can just interact much better than I used to, because sort of with a very young child I'm a bit unsure like what to do with it, but sort of once you can really speak to the child, it's it's cool. Like you can, I don't know, it's that's the fun part for me, and sort of the first part is more like, okay, we have to, we're getting born too early, like,
yeah. Sorry, I don't want to derail you, but yeah, you were saying that he's like correlating the human size with their whittler, and then he also notices that Hannah maybe does not have one, and therefore it just must be really small to match her size, I guess. Is that what you were saying?
Yes, this is also sort of the theme of like growth that I think, okay, I'm saying this because there have been sort of interpretations of this, especially like from Stephanie Swales, where she says, actually sort of this is sort of almost a common thing like to say, especially I think in psychoanalysis or like Lacanian psychoanalysis, I'm not sure, but sort of to use Hans sort of saying, well, her whittle is so small that sort of it will grow eventually. Like people use that as an example for denial, for what's the perverse thing? Disavow, right. And I just don't think sort of that in this text this is actually the correct reading, because like previously we see that Hans is sort of figuring out this process of growth, and sees like, well, there actually sort of a baby can have no teeth, and eventually sort of they will grow teeth. So I think it's not disavowal to just apply the same logic to the whittler, where you say, well, I cannot see any whittler here, but sort of I also cannot see any teeth in a baby's mouth, and eventually they will grow. So this is sort of why I try to emphasize this a bit, because I don't think that's disavowal as such that we see here.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see as we work through, because I think sorry, it's hard to not jump ahead, but at some point, the father speaks to Freud, and Freud advises the father to explain to Hans that women don't have whittlers and men do. And after that point, you can see that he is trying to, I think, disavow this, and he really doesn't want to accept this. But I think primarily the disavowal of the whittler is located on the mother, not really Hannah. I agree at the beginning. This is just totally logical. Yeah, I like that with the teeth, etc.
It's true. At a certain point, he does sort of like start like at a certain point he realizes that sort of women do not have whittlers, and then sort of he still like constantly plays with the at that point idea that they actually do have. Like he sort of realizes there's a recognition of them not having whittlers, but sort of he still maintains the idea that they do, the fantasy that they do, and I think that can be sort of more described as disavowal.
I'm trying to think like if he would have had any other opportunities, because he had no playmates, and he just had that one summer where he did have lots of playmates his own age, girls and boys. But apart from that, yeah, I don't know if he has had like opportunity to learn this. And I'm just trying to see, is this disavow specific to the mother? Does he kind of know already that like girls do not have this? I don't know. It's kind of hard to say, but because he hasn't like had that much exposure, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's not, we sort of cannot really see this from here, but I guess sort of, at least sort of we know that there is a question of like who or what sort of does have a whittler. Okay, so the threat of the mother, of the castration that sort of Freud points out, is she does this when she says this when Hans is 3.5 years old. And Hans is also 3.5 years old when his sister is born. And I think sort of this scene of the sister being born is very interesting, because to me, for Hans, the question of where do children come from is inextricably linked to the question of the whittler. I just see sort of that this really happens at the same point in his life, a indicator as to sort of these two questions basically being inseparable for Hans. And Hans sort of here said, this is page 6. The father said, at 5 a.m, labor began and Hans' bed was moved into the next room. He woke up there at 7 and, hearing his mother groaning, asked, why is mommy coughing? Then after a pause, the stork's coming today for certain. This is very interesting because he clearly sort of gets what's happening there. And then later on, he was taken into the kitchen. He saw the doctor's bag in the front hall and asked, what's that? A bag, was the reply. Upon which he declared with conviction, the stork is coming today. So I guess when the baby is already born, he sees, they say, he did not look at his mother, however, but at the basins and the other vessels filled with blood and water that were still standing about the room. Pointing to the blood-stained bedpan, he observed in a surprised voice, but blood does not come out of my whittler. This is very interesting because sort of he doesn't really witness the scene itself, but he hears it. He understands what's going on. He understands sort of that this experience, this observation is sort of childbirth or child delivery, and he also connects this to the whittler. Like he says this very clearly. Like he doesn't see what's going on. Still, he connects this to the whittler. He says, "Blood doesn't come out of my whittler." So this is just to me like an indicator that the question of like Whittler and childbirth is, they're fully linked for Hans. And also sort of something that I just want to like stick a pin in it and see if we find something to interpret this with later on, is that he says that sort of the doctor brings a bag, and then sort of Hans says, okay, the stork's obviously coming today. I'm just saying this because sort of later on in the case, we will see a lot of like questions of transportation, of baggage, of boxes sort of coming in. And this is why I just sort of found it interesting that sort of Hans like is a bit interested in like, okay, what is this? It's the doctor's bag. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that's really key. Like those themes, mother, Whittler, transportation, and childbearing. Yeah.
I would just do you have something where you want to go? If not, I would sort of just continue with trying to put down some pins that we can like pick up later on.
My next points are like more about, how do you say it, Gemunden?
Gemunden.
Gemunden.
It's even like I think it sounds like Old German to me, but I guess the city probably still exists.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Okay. But this is sort of what comes up next. We have basically 3 scenes in this whole case study. It's their house in Vienna, which they move into. We have Gmunden, where they go for summer holidays, and there you have other children that Hans plays with. You have sort of the 3 neighboring children called Bertha, Olga, and Fritzl. He plays with them, but there's also Marinde, and who is older. She's 14. The others are, I think, I don't know, between like 4 and 6 years older than Hans. And sort of he always plays with these children. All of them sort of come up later on again. And I think something that is interesting here on page 8 is sort of that he plays in Gmunden, he plays with these children, but sort of then he goes back. The parents say, well, he wasn't very fazed sort of by this. He wasn't very sad that he left the other children. But then at some point, he starts like imagining them as friends. He starts imaginary playing with these real friends from Gmunden, which I think is again like in a like development of a child. It's an interesting step where sort of you have like real children to play with. Okay, you leave them, you're a bit unfazed. Eventually, like you start like playing imaginarily with them. And think this is also something that Hans really sort of progresses into, develops more throughout this case study. Is like imaginary, how do you say it? Imaginarization? Symbolization and imaginarization. I'm just going to say that word because I don't know what the real one is.
I don't know what the word is. Yeah. I think just imagining.
Yeah.
Visualization and imagining.
Okay. And we see that directly when on page 9 he starts playing with the doll, and like we've seen previously that he understands the distinction between animate and inanimate objects, and he starts playing with the doll, which also will come up later again. I don't know if this doll, but a doll. And it says, he was given a doll to play with and undressed it. He examined it and carefully said, a Whittler is ever so tiny. So same theory as with little Hannah, like the Whittler will grow eventually. But sort of this is interesting to me because as I just said, like Hans knows that sort of inanimate objects don't have whittlers, but sort of he's able to sort of abstract from that. Like he knows sort of, okay, like this doll he's playing with, it's supposed to symbolize a human. And because it symbolizes a human, it also will have a whittler. It has a whittler. It is whittlered. Yes.
Yeah, so still, I don't know. Yeah, I guess that's further evidence to him. Yeah, still obsessed. He's always looking out for them, and I guess still disavowing them at this point.
I don't think at this point yet, but he will eventually.
Okay.
Right, and he's obsessed with the whittlers, like when sort of his dad draws a giraffe, and like Hans says, draw the whittler too, like draw the whittler on the giraffe.
So I think the drawing of the giraffe is key as well later on to the fantasy he has about the giraffes. But I don't know if you want to say anything more about the London.
No, not really. Yeah, then sort of when Hans is 4 years old, they move into the new flat. The flat, everything will occur in throughout the case study. And then again, when Hans is 4.5 years old, they move again to Gmunden, where he meets again his friends that he met before. And there's a little thing, like Freud talks about sort of object choice, that sort of Hans is like very fond of or like possessive of like other girls. Like he says, okay, there's obviously sort of a sort of object choice of the originally invested object. And then he's asked, which of the girls are you the fondest of? And he says Fritzl, which is not a girl, obviously. But sort of, I think this is interesting again, because at the beginning, we see so many instances where sort of Hans doesn't make sort of leaves things very undifferentiated. I think like Freud says, okay, like this is an indicator for like Hans also having some like homosexual tendencies. But I think to me, it also makes sense, like when he says there's just sort of an analogy between this and him saying, well, I can pee out of my butt when the will is gone. And like him also saying like, who of the girls are you, him being asked, who of the girls are you being the fondest of? And he says Fritzl. It's just like, okay, it's meshed. It's not differentiated sort of at this point.
Actually, that's a really good point, because I didn't really love Freud saying, oh, maybe this has like overtones of homosexuality. Like I don't feel that, but I like what you're saying. He has at this point not differentiated males and females based on whittlers, and so when you say who's your favorite girl, he's like a boy, Fritzl. I think that makes more sense. Yeah. Like, because Hans is funny, like he knows he's funny. Yeah, I feel like it is just owing to this undifferentiation. I like that. I think that is a better explanation. Yeah. And and also at the same time, yes, Fritzl was his favorite, but also his favorite was Maradil.
Yeah.
Maradil. He seems to like the older ones.
Yeah. I think he's fond of and she will come up differently also like later in the play. Like Marindl will be they have this is, I don't know if this is old German or like already like Austrian German, but they have like you have vowels, and what's the other one?
Consonants.
Yeah, like where you have words where they're like weird consonants next to each other, like Fritzl. People wouldn't name really their child Fritzl anymore. Or Gmunden. It's also like
yeah. These
it doesn't roll off the tongue.
Sorry, it is interesting. I was just saying that he likes the older ones, Fritzl and Maribel. Because Hans has this more aggressive, like playing around with the younger girls. And then with some other girls, he's very like gentleman-like.
And shy.
Yes. Freud says this is more to do with I don't know, like the kids' class. But it is interesting that he likes the older ones and plays very sweet with the older ones as well. Not only Maridil, who's 14, and how old is Hans? 4 at the most here.
Yeah.
But also later on, Hans is maid and he's like riding the maid like a horse. It sounds very sweet. Like he seems to really enchant these older people.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like what does that seem like? It is like a mother.
Yeah, I think she's closer to mother than probably to she's a not full mother. Like she isn't like mother like his actual mother, but sort of more and like he will later on sort of call the housemaid his horse, and like play horse around her with her. I think sort of they are sort of a bit more towards like the mother position, at least.
I think, through these interactions with Maridel, the 14-year-old, and also the maid, he is like playing out his potential relationship with his mother. With Maridel, he says to his mum, like, oh, can Maridel come and sleep with us? I'm going to go and sleep with Maridel. And it's kind of like this playing out of, yes, mum, sometimes I sleep with you, but now I'm going to go with this other like girl. And exactly the same with the maids. Like later on, it's said that potentially the horse may symbolize the mother in some way, and then he's literally riding the maid like a horse and calling her my horse. And so again, playing in a much safer way, like playing out these strange significations that he's making.
Yeah. No, I think that's No, I see it also like that. So this moment where Hans says, well, I wanna go downstairs and like sleep with Marinde. Then his mother says, you really want to go away from mommy and sleep downstairs? And Hans says, oh, I'll come up again in the morning to have breakfast and do number one. I think this is also already like a very good indicator of what we will see later on, because we have 3 themes that will come up the whole time again. First of all, him being able to come back again if he wishes to. Like he says, well, I can go away, but sort of the path back is always open. Like I will go to Marinde, but sort of I will just come back the next morning. And we will see this again in the transportation stuff. Then another thing, and this is really something that neither the father Freud nor Lacan really pick up on properly, is sort of the concept of eating and shitting. Like, because he will say, I will come back in the morning to have breakfast and like to poop. And I think these 2 questions, I mean, Freud, they all 3 of them do sort of pick up on this theme, but sort of, I don't think they really interpret it the way that you can interpret it from this text. This is what he will be able to come back to, eating and shitting.
Okay, so no, well, before you go on, so I just think we should emphasize it again. This line is so funny, and I think it was so funny to me, I just overlooked it. I actually was, I was sitting with someone and I showed them this line because it's so funny, but I then completely overlooked it. But yeah, so just to reiterate it, the mum says, you really want to go away from mummy and sleep downstairs. And I just think this is a classic Hans reply. He's so deadpan. We'll just come back with this completely logical reason for, I'm gonna go sleep with Maridel. And he says, oh, I'll come up again in the morning to have breakfast and do number one.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It's true. I can always come back. That's an interesting one. Okay, we will explore that one later. But I completely overlooked to me, it just seems so orderly and rational. I'll have breakfast and do a wee.
Yeah, it makes sense because I will come back in the morning and have breakfast. But sort of like, yeah, so what he will come back to is like eating and yeah, doing number one. Let's again, like I feel like in this first third, like a sort of we can really use it like to put some pins down into the text that we will later on see if we can interpret that, make use of it, see how it develops throughout whatever we read more. And sometimes like not. Sometimes there are things that I think are interesting here, but I don't think we will be able to pick them up later on. This is, yeah, just how language also works.
Yeah. I think it would be useful just to make like a few bullet points of these key ones that have stuck out to us. Because it's quite frustrating outlining all the stuff and not being able to bring it into the theory, but we can do that more next time. But I don't want to forget all of these key points. Yeah, that is a really interesting one though. But yeah, it's true. Those same themes, like the return, the circuit, doing number one, weeing, whittling. The eating, you'll have to explain more to me later.
Yeah, this is something that is really like, yeah, it is really not picked up upon, and it's also difficult to spot. But this will come up later on. Well, when he's 4 1/4, this is page 13.
Yeah.
His mom says again, like, is asking him, did you play with your penis? And no, that's not what she asks. He says, why don't you put your finger there? Like, why don't you like play with your penis, basically? And
yeah,
like,
so she's drying him off, I guess, like after a bar. And I guess again, as all like curious children would be like, no, like, why do you touch every single part of my body, but not that one? And he's like, why don't you touch me there?
Oh, right, I misread it.
Yeah, do you think like he's like, yeah, why don't you put your finger there?
Yeah.
She's like drying him around it, and she says, because that be piggish. And he's like, what's that, piggish? Why? And she says, because it's not proper. So yeah, this is important because it is this kind of first potential rejection from the mother onto this being, which we know Hans at the time, you know, he enjoys touching it at night. And so, but again here, so she says it wouldn't be proper, sorry, but then Hans laughing replies, but it's great fun.
Yeah, right.
He knows it's great fun. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is something that sort of Hans will do a lot, where he sort of in the moment will like be like, oh, this is funny, this is silly. You make sort of some remarks, but you like see in what we see later on that sort of something clicked, that something stuck with him. And I think this is very nicely emphasized, that sort of this comment by his mother that he doesn't really understand at that point. Like afterwards, he has a dream where sort of for the first time something is, or like maybe not for the first time, but something clearly becomes distorted, unrecognized. And this dream is goes, this morning Hans woke up and said, I say, last night I thought, someone said, who wants to come to me? Then someone said, I do. Then he had to make him whittle. I checked the German one. It's the last sentence is more correctly translated with there he had to let him make whittle, but it's not super it's not super important. The point is more sort of, and this is also emphasized by Freud, is sort of that this is a distorted dream. Like he's saying someone said to someone, and then someone had to do this and this. I think this is interesting that sort of this dreams comes up after the mother like tells him, like, you shouldn't. I'm not gonna like play with the penis, and it's improper to like play with the penis. So we kind of,
and dreams of, but it seems one of the girls in the summer holiday doing that.
Yeah.
But mum says no, but then he dreams that another girl does.
What do you mean with another girl?
So at the beginning, it's not clear, but when the father asks him more, okay, but that is actually the father's interpretation because Hans just says she said. In the dream, he says it's a she. So it's true. No one actually, it's true. I don't know. It could have been any she. Doesn't have to have been Berta or Olga from the summer holiday. But I think the father thinks it is those girls because it's based on the format of them playing this forfeit game that they would play in the summer holiday that he would play with the girls.
You're right, sort of that the father sort of asks again, and he says that like I got him to tell me the dream again, and he told it in the same words, except that instead of then someone said, this time he said then she said. So right, this is sort of what you're saying.
So it actually could be anyone.
Yeah, I think
forfeits.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, this dream is clearly unclear, and I think that sort of in itself is what sort of is basically relevant about this. What I'm saying
then later, sorry.
What I'm trying to like implicate, even though I cannot say it properly here because this doesn't really give me enough to say this. It's sort of what we see here is a start of a repression. Like something becomes distorted, unrecognized. We see something starting to get repressed.
Yes. Yeah, and then I guess that's confirmed a bit later. I don't know what the time difference is, but when the dad is helping Hans go to the toilet, and Hans is like, can we go to the back because I don't want the girls to see me, the little girls from who we were just talking about, the little girls from the summer holidays.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas before, and I mean we discussed it, but yeah, I think before he did speak about the girls watching him whittle, but now he doesn't want them to anymore.
Yeah, right. And Freud says like there's something that was pleasurable before now sort of becomes repressed, and like Freud's interpretation is sort of that his fondness sort of someone like touching him is sort of the thing that sort of gets repressed. But I also think sort of that this is that's sort of this is in connection with like maybe the mom telling him, well, this is piggish, this is improper.
I guess in stages, right? He's been told has he been told to stop doing it? Not yet.
No.
Okay, sorry. So this is the first stage, the mother saying, I'm not touching that. And
Wait.
the stages to come. I think the second
No, he has been told.
He has been told
early on when he had like the very
when she threatened to cut it off. Yeah, right. Okay, all right. So now from both sides, he has been told, Hans, you shouldn't touch it at night, you should not be doing this, and also I am not going to do it. And so now he is repressing this. And very soon we'll see though that it is quite hard for him to repress this at the beginning. I think so. The next part coming up is when the phobia emerges in Hans, but just before that is the really important thing we were saying. We were talking about what things precede the phobia arising in Hans when he becomes scared of leaving the house and scared of horses. And it's just this like very quick observation from the father, just saying that again, Hannah was having a bath, Hans's little sister, and Hans begins laughing. And when he was asked why is he laughing, he replied, I'm laughing at Hannah's whittler. And they asked why, and he says, because her whittler is so lovely. And this is like the first time that Hans is kind of potentially acknowledging that there is nothing there. And that's why it's funny. It's we often laugh when there is a contradiction, you know?
Yeah, exactly. This I think this is how I read it too. And I think really sort of Hans laughing is it will become an indicator throughout this text that sort of there is some, well, it means something at every stage a bit differently, but at some point it also means sort of a kind of recognition. And this is also just like what Freud says. He says, like, for the first time here in laughing, Hans is recognizing the distinction between male and female genitals instead of denying it. And I think this is correct. Like, I think this is sort of really like before he had reasonable doubt about what women
Having word
loss. Yeah. I said this wrong. What I was trying to say is, before, like, it sort of the Whittler sort of could be explained just by the lack of a Whittler could be explained with the theme of growth, like it will grow. And I think this is really sort of the first time that, like, he's sort of able to recognize, well, actually it is different. It's not like teeth. And yeah, this is what sort of makes him laugh in the way that you said, as experiencing a contradiction or something.
Yeah, so you can see how these two things really do support, like, Freud and the castration complex. These two things happen before the phobia. He is, he finally learns potentially women do not have penises, and the mother tells him he should not be touching his and that she will not touch his. Still a bit of a leap to link the rejection to it being, well, I mean, she did literally threaten him with cutting it off. So yeah, I don't know. It does kind of support. You can see why Freud would have got very excited.
Yeah, and I think also that it really took sort of. I'm sorry, this is a bit of a. I feel like I'm saying too much here, but, like, I think really you see, like, why also sort of Lacan was necessary to read this text and, like, to really read it also properly, because in Lacan, castration. I don't think there was a slip. I think that was the real pronunciation. Maybe. I don't hear it, at least. Castration is not only the castration of the subject, but sort of also the castration of the other. Like, when we go into sort of the theory of the name of the father, like the name of the father is precisely I almost said it again. Castration. What? Castration. I don't know. That's something. Whatever. That sort of castration is always also the castration of the other, and sort of the limiting of the other. The limiting, sort of the limiting of the other's desire. Other written with maybe the M before, because what we're talking about here is the primary other, which is usually performed by a mother, but it can also be whoever is in that position. So, like, the name of the father sort of topping, giving meaning to, giving framing to the mother's desire. This is, I think, kind of a bit missing in what sort of Freud is saying, because, like, he's really trying to emphasize castration, because, like, this is sort of the conflict that he was also in, like, people saying, like, well, castration, it's also about, like, childbirth. Childbirth is a castration, and sort of the lack of sort of the mother's breast is a castration to the child, to the baby. And, like, Freud is really trying to say, no, like, castration sort of is about the threat of sort of losing the penis. This is sort of what he's saying. I think that with Lacan, sort of we get a bit more in saying that sort of castration is also about the castration of the other, which I think is really what it's playing out here in this case. Like, this is why I want to emphasize sort of that for Hans, the question of the whittler and the question of childbirth sort of come up at the same time, because to me, the question of childbirth is the question about what is the other's desire and what is this structure, this symbolic structure that I find myself in, and where do it come from? Why? Like it's almost sort of a metaphysical inquiry, but sort of like why am I here? Basically, what am I? And like the question of what am I is the question sort of that leads one to asking, what do you want?
I completely agree. I think if we just stick with Freud's castration complex, it's just not very satisfying. It doesn't do justice to the complicated situation that Hans and we all find ourselves in. And I think we can see actually through the phobia of the horse and how it develops and how it is quite complex and systematized, that it isn't just about fearing that your penis will be cut off. It's just so much more complicated than that. And I like the way that Lacan views this castration in a more symbolic way, which I guess we'll speak about. But ultimately, it's you, trying to navigate this difficult relationship with your mother where it can feel at times very strong, but then at other times there is rejection and you are having these new feelings yourself. And I guess, we will speak about all these things. But I think just reducing it down to fearing that you're going to lose your penis. No, I guess what you have emphasized that actually is a lot about the other person, about the mother and what they desire and how do I navigate this situation.
Yeah. And also in Lacan, like a big point of his is sort of when we're talking of the big other in the sense of like primary other, I don't think these are equatable, but sort of the big other in the sense of like, as we talk like primary caregiver. What we're talking about here is one, the desire of the other, but also sort of the desire of the other is also sort of always a question about language and symbolization. Like, what is this language structure that we find ourselves in? And sort of it's not all about the interpersonal relations we find ourselves in. It's also a question about like what makes these interpersonal relations possible in the first place. And I think this is really something that Hans is inquiring also a lot. And this is also why I wanted to emphasize sort of these little steps of how he acquires understanding of the world he's living in, and sort of why I also wanted to say like, well, let's also look at when he starts to just like pick up things imaginarily, symbolically, because I think this is also like, this is part of what sort of castration is. Like Lacan writes, the symbol is the death of the thing. And I think this is like, we really see this sort of in this process of Hans, the process that Hans finds himself in, is that sort of the moment like he starts to like pick up things imaginarily, symbolically, they become uncertain. Like sort of his relations become uncertain. And so we see this especially in a really like Lacan's interpretation of the giraffe dream. We haven't talked about this yet, but the giraffe dream is, I'm just gonna skip forward to it. Yeah, maybe I don't skip there. Maybe what I was just want to say is picking up things symbolically precisely means that you are are distancing yourself from the real thing. And I think we can say this also in the Lacanian kind of sense. Like when he's playing with the children in Gmunden, he leaves, and then at some point he starts to like play with them imaginarily. Like he picks up this actual sort of experiences and then just like plays along with it in a imaginary symbolic way. And yeah, so like what does it mean to like play with imaginary friends that actually sort of also are like your real friends? What does it mean, like who, it's I'm struggling a bit to say what I want to say, but sort of you put you, in a certain sense, you put another layer sort of on it, but also in a certain sense you erase something, like you erase something from that experience with the real people, and like sort of just like play with them as if they were there, but they're not actually there. And sort of this is something that, this is the game of presence absence that Lacan is talking a lot about in Seminar 4. Like you have a sort of a game of like presence absence. You can sort of imaginarize someone's comings and goings, like primary symbolization, I guess you could say this. No, it's whatever. I'm going to say it. It's a bit wrong, but yeah, sort of what does this do to the way the child finds himself situated in relation to what is going on around him, and in the relation to the relations he has with his mom, his dad, the people around him.
Yeah, I like that. It's like easier when it's in the real, and then you have to symbolize it, you lose something, and you have to navigate it in a different way. So I guess we could like outline the phobia.
What?
We could outline the phobia, the emergence of that. It says so. When the phobia first arises, Hans is with. He's not with his mom or his dad. He's with, I guess, like the maid or the babysitter or whoever. And he gets scared in the street, and so then he comes back home, and they ask him. He begins in the street. He begins to cry. He's asked to be taken home. Says he wants to coax with his mommy, which means like, I guess, be in bed and be caressed by mommy. So I think Freud interprets this very literally. He's literally been separated from his mother. He's not with his mother. He cries. He wants to be back with her. But then it's interesting that, and when he's asked why, what, did something scare you? And he there's nothing. He says, I don't know. And then the next day, his mother takes him. So he is no longer actually separated from his mother, but he becomes scared again. This is on page 17.
On the way back from Schönbrunn, he said to his mother, after much internal struggling, I was afraid a horse would bite me.
So this is the first time he actually identifies some phobic object, the horse, which he didn't identify the day before. This part makes me really sad. In the evening, he then has like another attack. And we see this throughout, like he is scared, obviously, when he goes out. He now has this kind of phobia of horses, doesn't want to be out with them. But often what will happen as well in the evening, he will kind of think about it again and get upset. I think this is so common with kids. You do get upset at nighttime. I thought it was because it is at nighttime, you then are separated from your parents, you go in a different room. Freud said this is when like your libidinal energy is quite high as well, so it could be because of that. But it makes me sad. He says that evening, like, I know I shall have to go for a walk again tomorrow. And then later he says the horse will come into the room. And I think like we all feel that, as a kid, and you get scared of stuff, and it's the horrible part is when you have to face it again. And to me, I think this really shows this circuit he is in with his mum, and he just knows this is just the beginning. Like, it's just that horrible feeling. And it's weird that he says the horse will come into the room, because I guess later on we'll make the analogy between the horse and the mum. And he's literally, this is like the first he said it of it. It's the first day, and he's saying all this random stuff. And it's strange that he says the horse will come into the room, because maybe the horse is already in the room. Like maybe it is, the mother and this difficult relationship he's trying to navigate.
Yeah, I think I didn't really outline this because I didn't really know what to do with this sentence, but sort of what you just said, like, I think it is interesting that Hans is afraid out in the streets, afraid of horses, afraid of going outside of the house, but he says here sort of the fear is, well, the horse will come into the house. So like it's a bit of a, I don't know if a reversal is the right word, but sort of like, it seems like the house, the inside, later on the small circuit are the safe space, basically. And sort of once you go outside, there the scary space starts. But sort of here he says, well, I'm afraid that the horse will come inside the house, which I find kind of interesting. I also want to say, like, I think it's very important sort of to emphasize that at the beginning of this case history, and when the parents first started to write Freud, like Freud really says this in a good way, where he says, like, at the beginning, there's just anxiety. Sort of there's just, I guess we can say with Lacan, there's just sort of a rupture in whatever previously worked for little Hans. And sort of at the beginning, it is, again, sort of a undifferentiated anxiety. And the phobia the horse phobia will give some content to this undifferentiated, more all-encompassing anxiety. And it will give you exactly like a kind of space to be differentiated, like inside, outside. I'm afraid there where the horse is. This is all I wanted to add.
It's true. It's like has to become crystallized into a phobia, which I guess it did do quite quickly. Yes, and so I guess it mentions here as well, like on the same day, again, like a lot of things are happening to Hans as we just outlined before the phobia comes, and then it says here on the same day, the mum asks, "Do you put your hand to your whittler?" And he answers, "Yes, every evening when I'm in bed." And then the next day he was warned to not put his hand to his whittler. When he woke up, he was asked about it, and he said he put it there for a short while, all the same. So yeah, I think like you said, what did you say? Something precipitates the anxiety, like there's some kind of like rip in how he is navigating his world. I think all of these things we have been speaking about, this, awakening that he has with the Whittler, but his mum's rejection and being told not to do it. And I don't know what else.
Also Hannah's birth.
Hannah's birth, yes. And one more. Oh, and him acknowledging the difference between.
Yeah. Right. Sort of this is the stuff that sort of that introduces everything upon which then eventually like this anxiety and the phobia start.
I thought so. It's hard to outline this because Freud starts saying the phobia is just representing separation from the mother. But then he says that anxiety, this is on page 19, that his anxiety corresponds to like this repressed longing for the mother. And he says that anxiety is pathological when it can't be transformed, it can't be satisfied. So the mother actually is present, and she was present that second time, the anxiety is still there.
Yeah. I think sort of the way that Freud, I like this part sort of like him saying, well, yeah, what you just said, that sort of, it becomes, what was the word you used? It becomes, sorry, I'm a bit.
I said that it can't be satisfied, like the longing can't be satisfied.
Yeah, right. That sort of Freud says, well, at the moment, sort of when this is the what I'm trying to say is sort of that this is a real transformation in the kind of object that the subject is in relation, finds himself in relation to. Like when you have an object, like let's just use food as an example. You are hungry. It's a biological instinct, and you are hungry. You eat some food. You become full. You stop eating food. We see this very much in eating, but sort of that in human subjectivity, we also find just the case everywhere that like people even eat food when they're not hungry anymore. They go beyond eating the food that fills them. And sort of this is what, in psychoanalysis, I guess you would call like trieb, drive, objectality in contrast to objectivity, where you have sort of the aim sort of is more about circulating around the object which you desire, rather than just fulfilling a need and then be done with it. Yeah, I don't know, like thinking about fast food, like you eat chips, you feel full, you feel like you don't want to eat chips anymore, but you continue to eat chips, and eventually you feel like kind of ill. And I think sort of this is what sort of Freud is describing here. And
sorry, just one thing, like it's because it's a really good example of the food, but now I want to bring it back to the mother, and it's almost like, I don't know, this question mark in the relationship it's strange that it like both causes an excess and also a not enough, in terms of an excess in that it can't ever be satisfied now. But precisely because there's this question mark, you don't even know what you like. Hans doesn't even know what he wants. So how can it even be satisfied? I mean, it's really nice to start with a very concrete example of the food, and then trying to put it onto the mother is difficult because Hans is literally trying to work it out. That's literally why he has phobia. So I guess it's just more, even if I can't fully articulate it, I agree that the relationship with the mum can no longer be satisfied because, as we've said, something has been ruptured and it can't continue.
Yeah, this is what Lacan really tries to hammer down in Seminar 4, when he says like there was this sort of luring game between sort of child and mother, and like this game eventually sort of was disrupted, doesn't really work anymore. And like this is sort of this is how Lacan says we encounter, like this is how Lacan sort of explains the rise of the anxiety. And sort of one thing that sort of throughout this whole reading that I'm a bit like that I don't really like about Freud's reading is that he's always saying, well, the child is sort of, he's longing for the mother, like sort of his whole sort of wish is to be with the mother, and he's scared when the mother's away. But we see here that sort of this phobia really comes up when he's alone with the mother. Like in the streets, when he's walking in the streets with the mother, like it's only him and the mother. And then in Gmunden also, like before this, when the father says sort of he for the first time heard Hans say like, well, what if mommy wasn't here? What if don't have a mommy to coax with? Like first of all, in Gmunden, like Hans and mother were alone there. Like the father only later on joined in. And I just think, yes, this is sort of on page 18 here, on the, like in the middle, well, switching the page, but still on page 18. where it says, nor must we forget that for part of the time at Gmunden, he had been alone with his mother, and his father had not been able to spend the whole of the holidays there, and further that in the country, country, what is this? Country? Is it country?
Sorry, where are we?
Oh, sorry.
That in the country his affections, that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That in the country his affections had been divided among a number of playmates and friends of both sexes, while in Vienna he had none, so that his libido was in a position to return undivided to his mother. I think sort of what we see in Hans's wish to like be with the mother is, I think, like psychoanalysis really teaches us that very oftentimes wishes are fears and fears are wishes, and like that you can both wish for something that you fear, and you can also fear something that you really wish for. And I think this aspect is sort of really under-highlighted by Freud, where he says, well, what sort of Hans is experiencing here is sort of just like like an increase in his affection towards the mother. But like, what about if it is not only sort of increase in affection, but sort of also like already sort of a anxiety about her overreaching, about her sort of being able to, about there being something precisely undivided in their relation, like a circuit that is full, a circuit that is whole, a circuit that where you can always, whenever you go back, you can always come back from it. And just, I'm sorry, like I said, we wanted to like maybe we sort of stop here and pick up again, but sort of jumping to the end of like this first third, what will come up at the end is him having fantasies with like leaving with the dad and like doing forbidden things, like transgressing boundaries. To me, this very clearly, like, one is crawling under like a line that is there, under a rope that like cuts something, divides something, and the other is like smashing a window. I think these are really clear sort of fantasies of like breaking something, like making, in a sense, making a boundary by transgressing it.
Yeah, I agree. I think before the phobia, he would like go into his mom's bed, be hugged, everything was fine. But now he's doing that in the evening and it's making him upset again. And it's not just because, the anxiety it is because the anxiety is no longer satisfied. Like the mother cannot satisfy him anymore. Like it's bad when he's away from her and it's bad when he's with her. And now he has to figure out a new route. Hence why he's having these fantasies of like escaping this horrible circuit with his dad. And it's interesting that there is a transgressional element with that.
I think so. I think, but I haven't read the relevant parts of Lacan here. I think he really goes into that reading in Seminar 7, which I haven't read, but sort of really like, Zizek picks up on this in his critique on ideology, where he says like, the law cannot work without its own internal transgressions of the law. Like sort of the law is always reliant on like, and I think this is for ideology critique, this is very useful. Like when you see like, I don't know, police violence or whatever, something like this, or like raping priests in the church. Like you see like, okay, like in the church you have this really high sort of moral law. And like in this institution, you also find like the most unmoral transgression of the law. And like in like police forces, you really find like, well, okay, they're there to like keep the public order, keep the social fabric safe in a sense, like that's sort of the function. But like you always see like transgressions like beatings, illegal activities, and like in film noir, for example, or like in thrillers, you always have like the cop who's able to like who does his job very well because he doesn't really stick with the rules. You know, like he always transgresses the rules of the system to keep the system alive.
Yeah.
To truly be an effective detective, you have to like be able to break the rules. I think this is kind of what we see also. It's a stretch. It's a stretch saying
No,
that.
I like it. Like, is it what you're saying that in order for Hans to come up with these new rules of the game, these new laws, he also has to transgress them. Like, you
Yeah.
don't have one without the other. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah. I guess we can kind of finish like just by saying this last bit that Freud says on page 19. What we've kind of already said. So Hans's anxiety stood the test. The anxiety is still there, even though the mother is there, it should be satisfied. And the next thing for it to do is to find an object. And it was on this walk that he first expressed a fear that a horse would bite him on the walk with the mother. So he shouldn't have fear, he's with the mother. Anxiety is still there, so then it finds its object. And I guess what we'll talk about is why the horse. And I think Lacan answers this better than Freud and talks about how the horse does not represent one thing. It is a system of signifiers, and it's how signifiers work, like through metonymy and metaphor. And so the horse represents many different things as Hans figures out these new rules and this new way to navigate this circuit with the mother.
Yeah, I think like his word of universal signifier is really helpful for this. Like you have like something that can mean, you know, it's a signifier. It helps to foster like processes of understanding of putting things into language, but sort of in itself it is empty, and therefore like a lot of things can be projected onto it. It can stand in for many other things, and like these many other things are like the key to also like what is it actually that sort of Hans is afraid of? What is it actually that plays out in this phobia? And yeah, so I think this is what we will come to see in the next episode.
Yeah, what is it? What is it that Hans is afraid of? It is not just for its castration complex. It is way more. Yeah.